The deepest wounds are not always left by strangers. Sometimes they are left by people who never stayed long enough to know your name. The Franklin County Courthouse stood beneath a gray autumn sky, its stone columns catching the first light of the morning as people hurried through the revolving doors. Lawyers adjusted their ties while balancing heavy case files. Families whispered quietly on wooden benches, hoping the next few hours would change their lives for the better. Court clerks moved with practiced efficiency through marble hallways that echoed with the steady rhythm of polished shoes. Inside those walls, justice was supposed to begin with fairness. But fairness often depended on the people standing closest to the front door. Officer Michael Carter had guarded the courthouse entrance for nearly 17 years. His uniform was spotless. His badge gleamed beneath the overhead lights. Most employees respected him. Many feared him. Michael believed experience had given him an instinct for spotting trouble before anyone else noticed it. He trusted first impressions more than questions. To him, confidence often looked suspicious. Silence sometimes looked dishonest. And too often, appearances became evidence before facts ever had a chance to speak. That morning, his attention settled on a young black woman walking toward the courthouse entrance. She carried a slim leather portfolio beneath one arm and wore a charcoal gray coat despite the cool breeze. Her movements were calm, measured, almost graceful. She wasn't rushing like the attorneys around her. She wasn't nervously checking paperwork like the witnesses entering security. She simply walked with quiet purpose. Her name was Ava Brooks, 25 years old. She had traveled across the state to attend a civil hearing connected to a community legal advocacy project she volunteered with. Inside her portfolio were neatly organized court documents, handwritten notes, and a recommendation letter she had spent weeks preparing. Today mattered, not because she wanted attention, because she believed every person deserved to be heard. As she approached the security checkpoint, a courthouse deputy smiled politely. "Good morning. Good morning." Her warm voice carried none of the tension filling the busy hallway. She placed her portfolio inside the security scanner exactly as instructed. The machine beeped softly. Nothing unusual. She collected her belongings, thanked the deputy, and continued toward the elevators leading to the upper courtrooms. Michael watched every step. Something about her presence irritated him, though he couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the confidence. Perhaps it was the feeling that she belonged there without needing anyone's permission. He stepped directly into her path. "Hold on." Ava stopped immediately. "Yes, officer? Where do you think you're going?" "Fourth floor." "What for?" "I have business with the court." Michael folded his arms. "What kind of business?" "A scheduled hearing." "You an attorney?" "No." "A witness?" "No." "Then why are you here?" Ava answered exactly as she had rehearsed. "I'm attending a legal proceeding." Michael glanced toward the portfolio she held. "Mind showing me what's inside?" She hesitated politely. "The documents contain confidential legal materials." His expression hardened. "So you won't show me?" "I'm happy to present them to court staff if necessary." "That's not what I asked." Several visitors slowed as they passed. Ava remained composed. "I'm simply trying to reach my hearing." Michael took one step closer. "I decide who gets through this entrance." She looked directly at him. "I believed the courthouse decided that." The sentence wasn't disrespectful. It was honest. Michael didn't hear honesty. He heard defiance. Without another word, he reached forward and grabbed the front edge of Ava's coat, pulling it sharply as if to stop her from moving. The unexpected force caused her to lose her balance for a moment. Her portfolio slipped from beneath her arm. Documents scattered across the polished marble floor. A silver pendant hidden beneath her coat swung into view before settling against her sweater. Gasps echoed through the entrance lobby. An elderly couple stopped walking. A young law student instinctively bent down to help gather the scattered papers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Ava managed a grateful smile despite the humiliation. "Thank you." Michael barely looked at the papers. His attention remained fixed on the woman standing before him. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." The words settled over the lobby like cold rain. No one answered. No one moved. The young law student froze, the papers still in his hands. A courthouse receptionist looked away in visible discomfort. Ava slowly knelt to gather the remaining documents herself. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't accuse him. She simply picked up each page with trembling hands, carefully smoothing every crease before placing them back inside the portfolio. As she stood again, the silver pendant rested outside her coat. For the briefest moment, Michael's eyes caught its familiar shape, an old oak tree engraved inside a small circle. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. The image stirred something buried deep inside a memory he hadn't visited in decades. He couldn't explain why. He only knew that somewhere in the forgotten corners of his past, he had seen that pendant before. And neither he nor the silent crowd surrounding them could have imagined that the young black woman whose coat he had just yanked in front of strangers carried far more than court documents. She carried the one truth capable of unraveling everything Officer Michael Carter believed he knew about his own life. Sometimes the smallest act of disrespect opens the door to the greatest truth a person has spent a lifetime trying to escape. The courthouse lobby remained frozen. Ava Brooks carefully slipped the last document back into her leather portfolio before fastening the clasp with trembling fingers. She refused to rush, even though dozens of eyes remained fixed on her. Humiliation had a way of making every movement feel heavier. The young law student who had helped gather her papers stood nearby. "I'm sorry that happened." Ava offered him a gentle smile. "You didn't do it." Those 4 words carried no bitterness, only quiet honesty. Officer Michael Carter folded his arms as though nothing unusual had occurred. "If you're finished," he said, "I'd like to know exactly why you're wandering around this courthouse." "I'm not wandering." "You've already said that." "I have an appointment." "With whom?" She hesitated. "The information is included in my case documents." Michael shook his head impatiently. "That isn't an answer. It's the only one I can give." Several courthouse employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. One receptionist quietly reached for the phone before stopping herself. She wasn't sure whether the situation required intervention, or whether questioning a senior courthouse officer would only make things worse. Michael took another step closer. "You've been avoiding every question I've asked." "I've answered every question truthfully." "No." "You've answered them carefully." Ava met his eyes without hostility. "Those aren't the same thing." The sentence lingered between them. Michael looked at the silver pendant resting against her sweater once again. The tiny engraved oak tree seemed strangely familiar. For just a second, a memory brushed against the edge of his mind. A younger version of himself. A warm summer evening. Someone laughing beneath an old oak tree. Then the memory disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. He dismissed it. Coincidence. Nothing more. "You'll need to wait over there." He pointed toward a row of benches near the public entrance. "My hearing is upstairs. You'll stay where I tell you. I don't want any problems." "Then cooperate." Ava quietly walked toward the bench without another word. She could have argued. She could have demanded a supervisor. She could have drawn attention to the dozens of witnesses surrounding them. Instead, she chose patience. Not because she was weak, because years of disappointment had taught her that dignity was something no one else could take unless she surrendered it herself. As she sat down, she reached into her coat pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. Its edges had softened from being opened countless times. She looked at it for only a moment before placing it back inside her pocket. Across the lobby, Michael noticed the gesture. He frowned. "What was that?" She looked up. "Nothing important." "Let me see it." She gently shook her head. "It's personal." His expression hardened again. In this courthouse, personal doesn't override security. It isn't a security issue. You don't get to decide that. Before she could respond, the courthouse elevator doors opened. A middle-aged court clerk stepped into the lobby carrying a stack of hearing schedules. She immediately recognized Ava. "Oh!" Her face brightened. "Ms. Brooks." Ava stood politely. "Good morning." "We've been expecting you." Michael looked from the clerk to Ava. "You know her?" "Of course." The clerk smiled warmly. "She's here regarding the Franklin Community Legal Advocacy hearing." Michael remained silent. The clerk continued. "The judge specifically requested that she arrive before the morning session." For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed Michael's face. "The judge requested her?" "Yes." She glanced at Ava. "We were beginning to wonder whether you had been delayed." Ava answered quietly, "I was." The simple reply carried more weight than any accusation. The clerk slowly turned toward Officer Carter. She had witnessed enough to understand what had happened. Her smile disappeared, and as the lobby fell silent once again, Michael realized that whatever authority he believed he had been protecting was beginning to slip away beneath the quiet strength of a woman who had never once raised her voice. The past has a strange way of waiting in silence until the exact moment you believe it can no longer find you. Officer Michael Carter stared at the court clerk without speaking. "The judge requested her?" he repeated. "Yes," the clerk answered confidently. "She was instructed to arrive before the hearing begins." Michael's jaw tightened. No one had informed him, or perhaps they had, and he had dismissed it without paying attention. Either way, the certainty that had carried him through the morning began to crack. "What courtroom?" he asked. "Courtroom 6. The Civil Division?" "That's right." Michael glanced back toward Ava. She stood quietly with both hands resting on her portfolio. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She simply waited. There was something unsettling about her composure. Most people raised their voices after being embarrassed in public. Some demanded supervisors. Others threatened lawsuits. Ava had done none of those things. That silence disturbed Michael far more than shouting ever could. "You can go upstairs now," the clerk said gently. Ava nodded. "Thank you." As she turned toward the elevators, the silver pendant slipped from beneath her coat once more. This time it caught the morning sunlight pouring through the courthouse windows. The engraved oak tree reflected a faint shimmer across the marble floor. Michael's breathing slowed. That tree. He knew it. Somewhere. Somehow. The elevator doors closed before he could think any further. For several long seconds, he remained frozen where he stood. Then another memory surfaced. Not complete. Only fragments. Picnic blanket. Warm July air. A young woman laughing beneath an enormous oak tree outside a neighborhood park. She wore that same pendant around her neck. Denise. The name flashed through his mind without warning. Denise Brooks. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in 25 years. Before he could gather his thoughts, another courthouse employee approached. "Mike." It was Senior Bailiff Robert Ellis. "I just heard what happened." Michael shrugged. "Nothing happened." Robert looked around the lobby. "Half the courthouse is talking about it." Michael said nothing. Robert lowered his voice. "You probably should have let court administration handle that." "I was doing my job." "Were you?" The question lingered. Robert had worked beside Michael for over a decade. He knew the difference between caution and assumption. "You've been under a lot of stress lately," Robert continued carefully. "But people are watching." Michael looked toward the security checkpoint. "I don't need advice."
No.
"You probably need perspective." Robert walked away before another word could be exchanged. Michael rubbed the back of his neck. His eyes drifted toward the empty space where Ava had been standing. The pendant refused to leave his thoughts. Denise had worn one almost identical. He remembered buying it from a small craft fair during their final summer together. She had laughed because it wasn't expensive. "It isn't the price," she had told him. "It's the promise behind it." He had promised they would build a future together. He had promised they would never lose each other. Months later, after learning Denise was pregnant, fear had replaced courage. One decision became another. One unanswered phone call became dozens. Eventually, he disappeared completely. Michael closed his eyes. "No," he whispered almost to himself. "It can't be." Upstairs, Ava stepped out of the elevator onto the 4th floor. She paused before courtroom 6 and quietly reached into her coat pocket. Again she unfolded the worn piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't evidence. It was an old photograph. A young white police recruit stood beside a smiling black woman beneath a towering oak tree. The edges had faded. The faces had not. Ava gently traced the man's image with her thumb before folding the photograph once again. Then she looked toward the courtroom doors, unaware that downstairs, the first pieces of a forgotten life had already begun falling back into place. The past never disappears. It simply waits for the moment when you are finally forced to look it in the eyes. Upstairs, the hallway outside courtroom 6 was unusually quiet. Ava Brooks sat alone on a wooden bench with her portfolio resting across her knees. Around her, attorneys reviewed notes, clients whispered anxious questions, and clerks moved between offices carrying stacks of files. She barely noticed any of them. Her attention remained fixed on the faded photograph in her hands. A young white police recruit stood beside a smiling black woman beneath a towering oak tree. The edges were worn. The colors had faded. But the promise captured in that single photograph had remained painfully alive. She gently turned the picture over. On the back, written in blue ink softened by time, were only 7 words. For our future, beneath our forever tree. M. Her mother had never thrown it away. Even after everything. 25 years earlier, Franklin County had looked very different. Officer Michael Carter was only 23. His academy graduation was still fresh in everyone's memory. He believed the badge on his chest could change the world. He believed love would always wait. And he believed there would always be more time. Denise Brooks believed him. She believed every promise spoken beneath the enormous oak tree in Riverside Park. When Michael gave her the small silver pendant engraved with that same oak tree, she laughed softly. "You know this isn't expensive." He smiled. "It doesn't have to be. So why this one? Because whenever you wear it," he gently touched the tiny engraving, "you'll remember where we decided to build our future." She kissed his cheek. "I don't think I'll ever take it off." For months, everything seemed possible. Then life changed. Denise told him she was pregnant. She expected fear. She didn't expect silence. Michael promised he only needed time. A week became another. Phone calls went unanswered. Visits stopped. Letters returned unopened. Eventually, there was nothing left except unanswered questions. Denise never begged him to come back. Instead, she raised her daughter with quiet determination. She worked double shifts, studied at night, saved every dollar she could. Whenever Ava asked about the man in the old photograph, Denise answered honestly. "He made a choice. Did he stop loving us?" Denise would smile sadly. "I don't know. But I won't teach you to hate someone whose story you don't fully understand." As Ava grew older, the questions became fewer. Not because she stopped wondering, because she learned some answers never arrive. 3 years earlier, before her mother passed away after a long illness, Denise placed the pendant into Ava's hands. "It belongs to you now. What about Dad?" Denise looked toward the window. "If life ever brings him back to you." She paused. "Don't let anger decide who you become." Ava had worn the pendant every day since. Not because it reminded her of the father she never knew. Because it reminded her of the mother who had never abandoned her. Back downstairs, Officer Michael Carter stood alone beside the courthouse security station. His hands rested against the counter. His thoughts refused to settle. Denise Brooks. The name echoed again and again inside his mind. He remembered the oak tree, the pendant, the promises. Then one final memory surfaced with painful clarity. A rainy afternoon. Denise standing outside his apartment holding an envelope. "I just wanted you to know." She had placed one trembling hand against her stomach. "You're going to be a father." He remembered watching her leave. He remembered convincing himself there would be another chance. There never was. Now, for the first time in 25 years, Michael found himself asking a question he had spent half a lifetime avoiding. If Denise had kept the baby, how old would that child be today? Upstairs, Just beyond the courtroom doors, Ava quietly slipped the photograph back inside her portfolio. Neither father nor daughter knew it yet, but the years separating them had already begun collapsing into a single morning that neither of them would ever forget. Truth rarely arrives with a shout. More often, it enters the room quietly, carrying a name no one expected to hear. The courtroom doors opened precisely at 9 o'clock. People slowly found their seats as the clerk organized the morning docket. Attorneys arranged exhibits across polished tables while the quiet murmur of conversations filled the room. Ava Brooks stepped inside with measured confidence. She chose a seat reserved for community representatives and carefully placed her portfolio beside her chair. Her heart was still unsettled by what had happened downstairs. Yet she refused to allow one painful encounter to define the reason she had come. Justice deserved more than anger. Outside the courtroom, Officer Michael Carter remained unusually distracted. His shift required him to continue monitoring courthouse security, but his thoughts refused to leave the silver pendant. Or Denise, or the impossible question that had begun haunting him. Could it really be? No. There had to be thousands of women named Brooks. Thousands of oak tree pendants. Thousands of coincidences. He forced himself back to work. Then a voice interrupted him. Mike! Court Administrator Helen Dawson approached with a tablet in her hand. I need a word. Her tone was calm, professional, never a good sign. She guided him toward a quieter hallway. I've received 2 witness reports regarding the incident in the lobby. Michael folded his arms. I handled a security concern. Did you? The woman refused to answer questions. Helen looked directly at him. Our security footage doesn't suggest that. Michael remained silent. Witnesses reported that you grabbed her coat. I stopped her. You pulled her hard enough to scatter legal documents across the floor. Michael looked away. Helen continued. The court takes complaints involving courthouse conduct very seriously. It wasn't a complaint. Not yet. The words landed heavily. Please remain available after your shift. We'll need your written statement. Before Michael could answer, the courtroom doors opened once again. The clerk stepped into the hallway. Officer Carter? Yes. The presiding judge is asking whether everything is resolved downstairs. Michael nodded automatically. Everything's under control. The clerk smiled politely. I'll let him know. She turned back toward the courtroom. As she opened the door, voices carried into the hallway. Community Legal Advocacy Foundation. Ms. Ava Brooks. Special recognition for volunteer service. Michael froze. Volunteer? Recognition? Nothing about the morning fit the image he had created in his own mind. Curiosity overcame him. From the partially open doorway, he caught a glimpse of Ava standing before the bench. The judge smiled warmly. Ms. Brooks, before we begin today's hearing, the court wishes to acknowledge your outstanding work representing underserved families through legal education. The courtroom answered with respectful applause. Ava seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. Thank you, Your Honor. I've only tried to help. Michael felt something tighten inside his chest. The woman he had treated like an intruder had been invited there as an honored guest. The applause slowly faded. Then the judge asked a simple question. Will your mother's memorial scholarship continue next year? Ava smiled softly. Yes, Your Honor. My mother always believed access to justice should never depend on income. The word struck Michael harder than he expected. Her mother, Denise, had dreamed of becoming a legal advocate. She had once spent entire evenings talking about helping families who couldn't afford representation. Michael suddenly struggled to breathe. Too many pieces were beginning to fit. Too many memories refused to stay buried. Downstairs, an elderly courthouse custodian quietly approached Helen Dawson. I've worked here 30 years, he said. I saw everything. Helen nodded. So did the cameras. The custodian glanced toward Michael before speaking one final sentence. Sometimes the hardest evidence to face isn't what's recorded on video. He looked toward the courtroom. It's what finally wakes up your conscience. For the first time since putting on his badge that morning, Michael Carter wondered whether the greatest judgment waiting for him would have nothing to do with courthouse policy, and everything to do with the life he had abandoned 25 years earlier. There comes a moment when denial becomes heavier than the truth itself. The morning hearing concluded just before noon. As people filed out of courtroom 6, several attorneys stopped to congratulate Ava Brooks on the community recognition she had received. She thanked each of them with the same quiet humility that had carried her through the difficult morning. She gathered her portfolio, slipped the faded photograph inside, and stepped into the hallway. She intended to leave quietly. Instead, she found Officer Michael Carter standing alone near the courthouse windows. He wasn't blocking her path this time. He wasn't wearing the hard expression she had seen downstairs. He simply stood there, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. When their eyes met, neither spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "Ms. Brooks." She stopped. "Yes. I'd like to apologize." His voice sounded unfamiliar, almost uncertain. "I handled the situation poorly." Ava studied him for a long moment. "I appreciate the apology." She made no effort to continue the conversation. She simply turned to leave. "Please." The single word stopped her. "I need to ask you something." She slowly faced him again. "What is it?" Michael glanced toward the silver pendant resting outside her coat. "That necklace." She instinctively touched it. "It belonged to my mother." His heartbeat quickened. "What was her name?" Ava hesitated. There was something unusual in the way he asked. Not curiosity. Recognition. "My mother's name was Denise Brooks." The hallway seemed to fall silent. Michael's face lost its color. For several seconds he couldn't speak. His lips moved, but no words came. Finally, barely above a whisper, he said, "Denise." Ava's expression changed. Very few strangers reacted that way to her mother's name. "You knew her." Michael looked down at the polished floor. His voice cracked. "I knew someone by that name." Ava reached into her portfolio. Without saying another word, she removed the old photograph. She held it where both of them could see. The young police recruit smiled confidently beside a laughing woman beneath an enormous oak tree. Michael stared at the picture. Every remaining doubt disappeared. His younger face, his academy uniform, the pendant, the tree, the promises. It was all there. His knees nearly gave way. "Where?" His voice trembled. "Where did you get this?" "My mother kept it." Ava answered quietly. "Until the day she died." Michael closed his eyes. "When?" 3 years ago." The word struck harder than any punishment he had ever imagined. He had spent decades convincing himself there would always be another chance. Another phone call. Another apology. Another tomorrow. There wouldn't be. Denise was gone. He opened his eyes again, tears beginning to form despite every effort to control them. "Ava." She looked at him carefully. "How do you know my name without reading the photograph?" He couldn't hide anymore. He couldn't invent another excuse. He couldn't outrun 25 years. "I knew it because—" He struggled to breathe. "Because your mother once told me what she wanted to name her daughter." Ava remained perfectly still. Only her eyes moved, searching his face, searching memories she had never lived. "My father," she whispered, "left before I was born." Michael nodded once, very slowly. "I know." Silence settled between them. Not an ordinary silence. The kind that arrives when an entire lifetime changes direction in a single heartbeat. Ava looked from the photograph to the man standing before her. She noticed the trembling hands, the regret written across his face, the impossible sorrow in his eyes. Then she asked the question he had feared for 25 years. "Officer Carter." Her voice remained calm. "Are you trying to tell me—" She paused, barely able to finish the sentence. "That you're the man who abandoned my mother?" Michael could no longer look away. With tears finally escaping down his face, he gave the only answer that honesty would allow. "Yes." One word. 25 years too late. Iron bars cannot imprison a guilty conscience. Sometimes the strongest prison is the one built inside a human heart. Neither of them moved. The courthouse hallway seemed strangely distant, as though every sound had been swallowed by the weight of a single confession. Ava continued looking at the man before her. For 25 years she had imagined countless versions of the father she had never known. Some were kind, some were cruel, some regretted leaving, others never looked back. She had never imagined finding him like this, wearing a badge, standing inside a courthouse. The very man who had humiliated her only hours earlier. Michael struggled to speak. "I don't expect forgiveness." His voice trembled. "I don't deserve it." Ava held the faded photograph against her chest. "My mother spent years wondering whether you'd ever come back." Michael lowered his eyes. "I know." "No." She shook her head gently. "You don't." Her words remained calm, but every sentence carried decades of unanswered questions. "You weren't there when she worked 2 jobs. You weren't there when she stayed awake helping me study because she was too proud to let me believe we were victims. You weren't there when she became sick." Michael closed his eyes. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. "You weren't there when she died." Silence. Complete silence. "I know." "No." Ava answered softly. "You know now." The distinction cut deeper than anger ever could. At the end of the hallway, Court Administrator Helen Dawson appeared with Senior Bailiff Robert Ellis. Neither interrupted. Both had witnessed enough of the conversation to understand something extraordinary had unfolded. Helen quietly motioned for Robert to wait. This moment belonged only to the 2 people standing before each other. Michael finally forced himself to look at Ava again. "I thought about Denise more times than I can count. Thinking isn't the same as showing up. I know. I was afraid." Ava's expression never changed. "My mother was afraid too." The words landed with quiet precision. "The difference is, she stayed." Michael's shoulders slumped. For the first time in years, he looked less like a veteran officer and more like a man carrying the full weight of every decision he had tried to outrun. "I failed both of you." "You did." She offered no comfort. "No cruelty. Only truth." "I can't change the past." "No." "You can't." He nodded slowly. "But if you'll let me." His voice nearly disappeared. "I'd like one chance to earn the right to know you." Ava didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her portfolio and removed another folded document. It wasn't a photograph. It was her mother's handwritten journal. She opened to the final page. "I've carried this for 3 years." Michael stared silently. "My mother wrote something before she passed away." Ava began reading. "If he ever returns, don't punish yourself by becoming the person pain wants you to be. Let truth guide you. Let dignity protect you. Whether he deserves forgiveness will never matter as much as whether you deserve peace." A tear rolled down Michael's face. He recognized Denise's handwriting instantly. Steady, graceful, gentle, exactly as he remembered. Ava carefully closed the journal. "I came here today to honor my mother's work." She looked directly into his eyes. "I never expected to meet my father." Michael could barely breathe. "You've already taken enough from our family." She paused. "I'm not going to let you take my peace too." Those words were not revenge. They were freedom. Helen quietly stepped forward. "Officer Carter." Michael turned. "The internal review regarding this morning's incident begins in 30 minutes. He nodded without protest. For the first time since putting on his uniform, he understood that the investigation waiting downstairs was only the smaller judgment. The greater one stood before him. A daughter who had inherited her mother's strength instead of her bitterness. And a father who had finally learned that some verdicts are delivered not by a courtroom, but by the people whose lives we leave behind. Justice is not measured by the punishment someone receives. It is measured by the person you choose to become after the truth is revealed. The courthouse conference room felt colder than the hallway outside. Officer Michael Carter sat alone at the long oak table, his uniform suddenly heavier than it had ever been. His service record rested neatly inside a thick personnel folder. 17 years of commendations. letters of appreciation, performance evaluations. None of them could erase what had happened that morning. Court Administrator Helen Dawson entered with 2 members of the Judicial Conduct Committee. A digital recorder was placed on the table. Helen spoke first. "This meeting concerns your interaction with Ms. Ava Brooks in the courthouse lobby." Michael nodded. "I understand. We've reviewed the security footage." "I know." Helen opened the file. "Would you like to explain your actions?" For a moment, the old instinct returned. He could justify his decisions. He could describe security procedures. He could argue that he had only been cautious. Instead, he looked directly at the committee. "I treated her unfairly." The room became silent. "I judged her before giving her the respect every citizen deserves." Helen watched him carefully. "You understand the seriousness of that statement?" "Yes, I do now." He took a slow breath. "I can't blame stress. I can't blame misunderstanding. What happened was my responsibility." The committee members exchanged quiet glances. Outside the conference room, Ava waited near the courthouse entrance. She had been asked whether she wished to submit a formal complaint. Helen had explained every option available to her. She could request disciplinary action. She could seek further investigation. She could pursue civil remedies if she wished. Instead, Ava quietly looked through the courthouse windows toward the city beyond. Her mother's words echoed once again. "Don't let pain decide who you become." Helen stepped outside after the meeting. "Ms. Brooks." Ava turned. "We're ready whenever you are." She nodded politely. "I've made my decision." Helen waited. "I won't file a personal complaint." The administrator looked surprised. "May I ask why?" Ava smiled gently. "Because accountability doesn't always require revenge." She glanced toward the closed conference room door. "He has to live with what he finally remembered." Helen lowered her voice. "That doesn't erase what happened." "I know. It also doesn't erase what my mother taught me." A few minutes later, Michael stepped into the hallway. His eyes immediately found Ava. He walked toward her slowly, stopping several feet away. "I've accepted whatever decision the court makes." She nodded. "I heard. I also requested additional bias training for every officer assigned to courthouse security." Ava looked genuinely surprised. "You requested it?" "Yes. If I failed this badly." He looked around the courthouse lobby. "Someone else might fail tomorrow." She studied his face. For the first time all day, she saw no trace of defensiveness. Only remorse. "I can't change who I was," Michael said quietly. "But maybe I can stop someone else from becoming that person." Ava looked toward the courthouse doors where people from every background entered seeking justice. Children, veterans,
Immigrants.
families, each carrying a different story, each deserving the same dignity. She extended her hand, not as a daughter welcoming her father, not yet, but as one human being acknowledging another's first honest step. Michael hesitated before taking it. His hand trembled. "So," he whispered, "is this forgiveness?" Ava gently shook her head.
No.
She offered a small, peaceful smile. "It's opportunity." Their hands separated. The distance between them remained, but it no longer felt impossible. Some relationships begin with love. Others begin with truth. And sometimes, after 25 years of silence, truth is the only foundation strong enough to carry even the smallest. Hope for tomorrow. Some people spend their lives searching for justice in courtrooms. Others discover that the most important verdict is the one they must live with after the courtroom grows silent. 6 months later, Franklin County Courthouse looked exactly as it always had. The marble floors still reflected the morning sunlight. Lawyers hurried through the hallways carrying overflowing briefcases. Families waited nervously outside courtrooms, hoping that fairness would find them before the day was over. Life had continued, but the people inside had changed. Officer Michael Carter still wore the same uniform. His badge remained pinned neatly above his heart. Yet those who worked beside him noticed something different. Now, before asking a question, he listened. Before giving an order, he introduced himself. Before making an assumption, he reminded himself that every person walking through the courthouse doors carried a story he could not see. The bias awareness training he had requested for the entire courthouse security staff had become part of every new officer's orientation. No one called it Michael's program. He never wanted the credit. It simply became another quiet step toward making the courthouse a place where dignity came before suspicion. One rainy afternoon, a frightened young woman entered the courthouse carrying a sleeping child. She looked exhausted. Her clothes were damp from the storm outside. Years earlier, Michael might have questioned why she seemed nervous. Instead, he walked toward her with a gentle smile. "Good afternoon." She looked up uncertainly.
I'm sorry.
"I think I'm lost." "That's all right. What brings you here today?" "I have a custody hearing." Her voice trembled. Michael nodded kindly. "You're in the right place." He carried the heavy diaper bag while she held her child. When they reached the elevator, she smiled through grateful tears. "Thank you for treating me like a person." Michael quietly answered, "Everyone deserves that." Across the lobby, Ava Brooks had witnessed the entire exchange. She had returned to the courthouse to speak at another legal education event honoring her mother's advocacy work. She watched silently as Michael returned to his post, not seeking praise, not performing for anyone, simply choosing differently than he once had. When the event concluded, Ava walked toward the entrance. Michael noticed her and offered a respectful nod. She returned it. Neither of them needed many words anymore. Some conversations continued through actions rather than sentences. Before leaving, Ava reached into her bag and removed the faded photograph beneath the old oak tree. She looked at it one final time. Then she carefully placed it inside a new frame. The past would always remain part of her story, but it would no longer define its ending. Michael watched her walk down the courthouse steps until she disappeared into the afternoon sunlight. He understood that becoming her father would never be as simple as sharing her last name or her blood. That opportunity had been lost decades earlier. What remained was something humbler, the chance to become a better man than the one who had walked away. Above the courthouse entrance, the words "equal justice under law" caught the fading light. Michael looked up at them for a long moment. He finally understood they were more than carved letters in stone. They were a promise that had to be renewed every single day by ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Because a badge can enforce rules. A courtroom can deliver judgments. But only character decides whether justice truly lives. And sometimes the greatest act of redemption is not being welcomed back into someone's life. It is spending the rest of your own making certain that no one else experiences the same pain you once caused. The man who had pulled a young black woman's coat believing she did not belong had discovered, too late, that she belonged not only inside the courthouse, she had always belonged inside the part of his heart he abandoned long before he ever abandoned her. And that truth became the verdict he would carry for the rest of his life.